And welcome to this episode of Trust or Bust, where Moed, Amin, and myself discuss trust and its importance in professional sales. In this episode, we're going to talk about common mistakes that people make and really what salespeople should be doing instead. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the opening of a sale. So, Moed, let's just talk about what do we exactly mean by opening?
Yeah, you and I talked about this earlier, right? Which is, you've got to be punchy, you've got to be clear, and you've got to be confident, right, in what you are saying. The opening for me is the start of the conversation, and I don't mean the cold outreach. I mean, you've got the sales meeting. This is the first meeting. The opening is how you begin that process, because as you know the saying, people make a judgment of you within 3 seconds, split seconds even. How you open determines how the rest of the conversation will go. So that's how I see opening. Is that what you see as well, Fred?
Yeah, no, exactly that. So we're not trying to open up a whole sales process. We're talking about the sales meeting, how we can have maximum impact. We've agreed to have a conversation. We need to be punchy. We need to get the right first impression straight away.
And it makes the
Cool.
job a lot easier throughout the whole process, right? Yeah.
Same page. So let's have a think about what mistakes, or what is the biggest mistake do you think that people would make doing this?
Yeah, and it's actually the one that you shared when we were talking in our previous podcast session, which was that we just talk about ourselves, right? The most common mistake that I see being conducted, even amongst the most experienced of salespeople, I've done it, I still catch myself doing it sometimes, right? And it's not just about bluntly talking about myself, it's that even at a subtle level, it's clear that I'm talking about this. Even if I'm talking about the buyer's perspective, it's from my angle or from my perspective of what the buyer is probably going through. So talking about yourself, or certainly talking about your own perspective and sharing things from your perspective, is one of the biggest and most common most common mistakes that I see salespeople making at the opening stage.
So to kind of bring it to life, what we're talking about is that somebody will jump into a meeting, you're probably all excited, and you get it to actually speak to somebody finally, and then it becomes me, we. It's all about what you do, at which stage the more you do that, the customer, the buyer is starting to gradually lose the will and realize, oh, what am I now doing for the next however long? Is that kind of what you mean?
Pretty much, yeah. Think about the language that's being used, right? Let me give you an example. I'm so glad that we are talking today because I have been doing homework about your company and I see that you're doing this, this, and this. In fact, we have seen also the data that shows that this is just all about you.
Wow. Now, that's really interesting because I think some people hear that and say, well, that's not too bad, is it? Yeah, I'm so glad we've got a meeting because I've been doing homework. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, so even that you're thinking people are going to start to retract from.
Because all they're hearing is the I, it's the repetitive,
Okay.
right? The brain is not, the brain can be a very lazy organ, right? It's trying to do things with as little energy as possible. So therefore it looks for things that are either salient, things that stick out, or it observes things that are commonly being done. And therefore it figures out a habitual way of either doing it with less energy or avoiding it, right? So I is like, okay, this person's all about them. They will zone out.
How interesting. So again, hopefully not many people would do the we, but the I, even though I'm interested in talking to you about your stuff, you're hearing me go, no, it's all about you, and I'm starting to already zone. The brain,
True.
the brain's a lazy organ. I love that.
It can be, yes.
Oh, so as I say, for me, yeah, on the first instance, it sounded as though it's coming from the right position, but we need to refine that, is what you're saying. So, what kind of things
Yeah, I
are
mean,
we
think of,
thinking about?
um, yeah, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this because, from a partnership perspective, the I would assume is probably not a great thing to talk about, right? It maybe you'll have maybe more about the we and stuff like that, but what are some of the things that we should be talking about? And here's an example, right? the companies in your industry, starting from an industry perspective is very important, right? Looking at your financial statement, right? Or looking at some sort of source, right? Something that they can validate and that they know about, the buyer knows about. I noticed, and I'm using the word I, but it's not as much. I noticed that one of the things that's been going on is X, Y, and Z. And it's a symptom that's happening in your industry. And the knock-on effect of that in your industry has been that these companies have lost market share by up to 20%. I worry that you might be going down that same route because it seems that it's symptomatic to some of these other companies. Interesting that we're talking about this today. We have some insights that we can share with you to help you, even if you decide that we're not going to work together. At the very least, want to ensure that you are taking away 2 or 3 points that you can actually use and will be of value for you. In fact, some of these other companies have done the same that we've worked with. Before we go into that in a bit more detail, you've obviously agreed to this meeting for a reason. Can we just understand, why have you agreed to take this meeting? What do you hope to get out of this?
Wow. Okay. So there's lots in there that we need to break down. I think the first bit is pretty clear. So it's saying, I've done my research, I've done my homework. Yeah, I've come prepared. Yeah, I'm not going to waste your time, or at least not deliberately, because I've tried to do the best thing here. And yeah, you said I noticed that, but I've used my brain to understand stuff about your business, is what I was saying. Yeah, I've noticed that this is happening. Yeah, and so we've seen these things happening. Okay, so why are you saying that particularly? I think
because it's a really good question, because one of the things that was it Demand Gen, and I think Forrester and a few other companies have done some research, and one of the findings has consistently been that buyers, and I found this in my own research with buyers, is that buyers really adhere to sellers who understand that the buyer's industry really well. Yeah. Because everything they do is within the context. They might say that they're expected to grow by 10%, but if their industry is growing at a compound annual growth rate of 20%, that tells a totally different story to if the industry is growing at 5%. So now you've got some context. They're always working within the context of their industry. So I talked about these other companies because they are competing with these other companies, or they're playing within the industry where these other companies are playing in. So if you show that it's not, I'm not just saying that you're going to come across this hurt because of my own analysis. No. We've seen this in other companies already. It's already happened. There's precedence for us, right? Precedent for it. So I put that in there for context and also to show that this has happened before, right? This is not just finger in the air or guesswork.
Yeah. And then I think you took it up a level as well, saying that's what the research showed, and we've seen it. In other words, I am working with people like you,
so all of a sudden
your competitors, and they're doing some good stuff about it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like to make clear, and I repeat about this all the time. Salespeople have this inferiority complex. Let me make clear: you speak to more buyers, more people in that buying group in 1 week than your buyer speaks to his or her peers in that same buying group in a year, right? If you do enough, call it a month. Let's be really conservative. In a month, you speak more, right? That means you hold a huge amount of value, a huge amount of information that's really valuable to that buyer. Everyone wants to know what their peers and people who are more successful than they are, or just as successful, everyone wants to know what they're doing. And you are potentially a conduit for that. So that's why I added that in there.
Yeah, no, I was speaking to somebody about this the other day as well, because I'd had an interesting day where I've been speaking to both buyers and sellers, and sellers are like, oh no, procurement, they've got far more power than us. And the procurement guys I was speaking to in the afternoon were saying, oh, sellers, they've got so much more power than us.
Yeah. Isn't that?
I was thinking, no, I've got with the power. I know that both of you. No, it's it's interesting, and it's not what they're explaining is it's not the pure information. The information is there. That's not a doubt. The power of the internet, but it's the insights and the interpretation that the people who are working with, because the customer's only working with themselves, whereas the seller's working with lots of others and seeing these different things happen, and they can bring that to the party, can't they?
Exactly. You want someone that can advise you. And the way that you can advise someone is when you have a unique perspective on a situation. You don't have to necessarily have unique information, but at the very minimum, you need to have a unique perspective of that. Have you come across someone that says something to you like, I know what he's talking about or she's talking about. Never thought of it that way before, right? It's a unique perspective, and instantly trust is established because they're seeing something that you're not. Right? They're
Yeah.
opening up a bigger portion of the world to you. And we love that, right? And you probably see this when you're in your partnership model, right? Because in your partnership model, trust is like the first thing that you talk about.
I always do. Of the 6 elements, I always start on that. It just makes most sense to me because it allows better communication. The relationship can build. We start then thinking about how we can build mutual benefit, all the other good elements of partnering skills. But we've got to start with trust.
And what are you seeing then in the opening from your
So
perspective?
similar sort of thing. I mean, the concept I picked up a little while ago, and I still use it. I use various terminology, depends, but quite often I talk about earning the right. You've got to earn the right almost to have the rest of the meeting. I mean, you've earned the meeting, fine, okay, and you've done something that somebody now wants to talk to you about. Happy days, and hopefully that's probably to do with the stuff that you've just referenced or going to reference. But then you've got to earn the right to just keep them interested and to get a bit pokey with questions. You know, it's because you want to go in and you want to sort of stimulate them, and to do that, the questions have got to be pretty decent. Might hurt them a little bit, might challenge them a little bit, attacks them. So yeah, we've got to earn the right by saying, look, I'm doing this, but I'm doing it with good intent, and I'm doing it not because I don't know. You know, I have done some stuff here. You're not just going to give me data that I need that I could have found out on the internet. It's
Exactly.
a different sort of reason that I'm questioning. That's where we're going with this. And so yeah, earn the right is the way that I would encourage people to set up. A very similar thing that you're saying there.
Interesting.
There's another little piece in there that you saw me scribbling away, where you talked about. So let's do this. So again, I refer to that as a statement of intent. So I would tend to be quite direct with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you some questions, but I need you to give me some information back so that then we can work on stuff together. Yeah, that's kind of like a little agreement there. Is that okay? Right, okay, let's just get a yes no answer sometimes. But I've got a little bit here. But at the very least, what do you say? At the very least, we can share something that'll be useful for you, and you take something from this meeting. I use slightly different words, but
yeah. So whether we work together or not, at the very least, I want you to walk away from this meeting with at least 2 or 3 things that will be of value to you that you can then use later on. Yeah.
Whether we work together or not, I want to work 2 or 3 things that will be of value.
So
Nice.
Generosity, generosity, which is
Yep.
part of that trust thing. But the other thing is this, which is you've almost kind of calmed them down here and saying, because most salespeople are like, I'm going to close you. And it just screams, I'm going to close you, right? And buyers have more experience in buying than sellers have selling, the average buyer, right? And so they are tensed up. And all of a sudden we say, look, whether we work together or not, don't worry, right? And all of a sudden you just kind of calm them down. You said, but I want you, what you're saying is, and this is why our friend Marcus Kauke says, which is, and Charlie Munger says it, which is you're leaving the conversation smarter than when you entered it.
Yeah.
And we value that, right? So from a neuroscience perspective, your brain your brain uses the same reward pathway for new information as it does for when you've just eaten sugar. That's how valuable new information is to your brain.
What?
Yeah, exactly.
That is so cool.
Exactly the same pathway.
Having a sales meeting with me is like having a Mars bar.
If it's a good one. If it's a good one. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
If they walk out,
you're going to feel
something...
slightly sick because you don't really. No, that's so interesting. So the brain, the stuff going on in the brain, the neuroscience, or the physiology, even
same pathways.
It's like eating sugar. It's like the reward chemical thing.
Yeah, same pathway. So you give someone something that's really valuable and that new piece of information that they can then take away. You give that to them. and you've made more of an impact than I think most sales approaches that I see out there.
I love that. Leave the conversation smarter than it started. And actually, both parties do that.
Absolutely.
You know, I as a salesperson leave smarter because I've got some information that I can use into my whole insights and maybe with info to write a proposal or whatever it may be. But the customer's thinking, that was great. You really made me think there. I'll have another meeting with you. Why would I not want to do that?
Yeah. And the opening is so important because you're getting their attention, right?
Yeah.
How you get that person's attention at the beginning is vitally important, because attention equals focus, focus equals absorption, absorption equals more likelihood of memory, right? And therefore action. So grabbing that person's attention by talking about them, right? This is called psychological egoism, right? It's the knowledge. It's basically describes, you know, everything that we do, every voluntary action that we take is in our self-interest. There's a subcategory called psychological hedonism, which is every voluntary action that a human being takes is in the pursuit of two things: experiencing pleasure or avoiding pain.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we are trying. Even altruism makes you feel good, right? You feel good when you see that you've done good for others. So ultimately, there is a self-interest in everything that we do. And, you know, get their attention by talking about them, and not from your perspective, but from their perspective. So even if you said, look, I've been speaking to, and I'm always a big proponent of naming people. Not saying I've spoken to the CTO of this company and that company and that company. I always say, hey, I spoke to Fred, who's the CTO of this company. I also spoke to John of this, or say that, and it grounds it even more. And we've been having this discussion where, you know, there's a lot of challenge around how you can do this, this, and this, and it's causing this much of an issue. And I've noticed in your finances that I'm starting to see some indicators of something like, oh, financial statement, whatever it is, the source is, but talk about, so I want to talk about that because I'm worried you might be going down that route. So yeah, that's how I see it.
Brilliant. That is so cool. So leave the conversation smarter than it started. That's what we want them to do. We want to make them feel comfortable when we put them under pressure, taking out the I, showing we've done research, and really just by being very careful with those language patterns. Yeah. So, and how just a subtle shift, even sort of saying the same thing we can say differently, it can have just such a massive impact on where we're going with the rest of the meeting.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. It's like your partnership model where you talk to me, and this was privately, where you talked about the mindset side of things, which is the mindset is about we and helping you, not I and helping me. I think that's how you said it. Right. And I think that if that mindset helps you formulate the right language, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
So I found that fascinating.
And it sets up the rest of the meeting, and that is a different episode. So
yes.
Brilliant. No, love speaking to you about this stuff, and I love it when you bring the neuroscience, and you know that.
Yes.
No, so we'll look forward to the next one, and we'll move into the meeting. Let's do this piece by piece and really put this together to make these meetings really work.
Absolutely. Yeah, look forward to it.
Cool.